Hello, hello.
Hi.
So today we're gonna study chapter 4.
Ooh, and what is chapter 4 about?
In chapter 4 there are 8 questions. So the first half are about finding main idea of each story, and then the other half are about what the writer is suggesting to us.
Oh, wonderful.
And usually the options are in Korean, so it can be a little easy.
Oh, good for the students, right? Yeah.
All right then. Are you ready?
We are, and we have our wonderful PPT by...
Gae Mi Saem.
Thank you.
All right then, time for exercise 1.
Here we go. And we'll put our vocabulary in there.
Yes, please.
Are you ready?
All right then, here we
Good.
go.
Unless we are very, very careful, we doom each other by holding on to images of one another based on preconceptions that are in turn based on indifference to what is other than ourselves. This indifference can be, in its extreme, a form of murder and seems to me a rather common phenomenon. We claim autonomy for ourselves and forget that in so doing we can fall into the tyranny of defining other people as we would like them to be. By focusing on what we choose to acknowledge in them, we impose an insidious control on them. I notice that I have to pay careful attention in order to listen to others with an openness that allows them to be as they are, or as they think themselves to be. The shutters of my mind habitually flip open and click shut, and these little snaps form into patterns I arrange for myself. The opposite of this inattention is love, is the honoring of others in a way that grants them the grace of their own autonomy and allows mutual discovery.
My. So each sentence is a little difficult to understand, huh? It's quite poetic.
Yes, they're writing in a poetic way. Yeah.
But the answer, we can find the answer quite easily. What is the text about, It's the main idea, right? So, but usually we have a prejudice, right? Toward other people. But we shouldn't do that, right?
Yes, we have what they say is a preconception, so maybe stereotype or judging a book by its cover.
Just like we claim autonomy for ourselves, we should respect other people's autonomy, right? And also take an interest in one another. So that's the answer, number 5.
Oh.
So that means we need to respect other people's autonomy and take an interest in one another.
That's
so
right.
What is that? That's what the text is about, right?
That's right. They're saying that you need to listen to other people and not use the ideas you approach them with.
So can we check why the rest 4 are not the answer?
Sure.
Okay, the first one says personal privacy should be respected.
Well, that's true, but in this case, you're not giving privacy, you're trying to learn about them.
Yeah, it's not didn't talk about personal privacy
That's
either,
right.
And number 2, we should not be too nosy about other people.
That's a good expression, to be nosy, to like gossip and try to figure out what's going on with people. But that's not what it's about, because they're asking you to learn more about them, but the real them.
And number 3, we need to express our opinions clearly. It's not about expressing our opinions, eh?
Not at all, no.
Yeah, number 4, we need to listen to other people's opinions to solve the conflicts. It's not about solving conflicts.
Yeah, it's not about necessarily their opinions, it's about their personality. And it's not about conflicts, you're right.
All right, so that's why number 5 is the answer. It's a little easy to find the answer, but each sentence is not that easy, to understand.
Yeah, it's not straightforward.
Yeah, okay. So if you find it difficult, it's not just you,
That's right.
Yeah. What do you think? Did you find it a little difficult too?
Yes, you have to pay attention to what's being said to understand it.
Okay. All right then, and shall we move on to exercise 2?
Yes.
All right then, time for exercise 2.
Oh.
Click.
There we go. Here's our vocabulary. Are we ready? Very good.
Ready?
Designing, building, operating, upgrading, and eventually retiring infrastructure projects is an expensive process. As aging infrastructure is repaired and retrofitted, and as new infrastructure is constructed, incorporating future risks from climate change impacts into their design, construction, and operation must become routine. Failing to take those risks into account will likely lead to increased maintenance and operating costs and shortened service life. Failing to screen projects for climate resilience will lead to more waste and more infrastructure collapse. The stronger infrastructure required may come with significant upfront cost, but employing thoughtful design strategies can allow for making relatively modest resilience investments now, while still planning for more extreme events down the road. This approach could well be cheaper than having to retrofit the infrastructure from scratch if conditions worsen beyond expectations. Very interesting.
So first of all, this is about infrastructure, right? So what does infrastructure mean?
So infrastructure is the sort of the skeleton of the city. So
Like a train or bridges,
sure, the roads, the sewers,
the basic stuff.
the basic things that create the city. Yeah.
I see. So what does the text talk about?
It talks about when we fix or repair or make infrastructure for the first time, we now have to keep in mind its effects on climate change or how to delay climate change.
So this day we have extreme, weathers this day. So some weathers we didn't expect. It's warm area, but it gets cold in the winter time, right? So when they build new infrastructure, they have to consider the kind of climate changes.
That's right. And also the effect that infrastructure might have to create climate change.
I see. So we can find the answer first of all, right? So the answer is number 5.
Wonderful.
So the answer is we have to consider climate change when building new infrastructure, right?
That's right.
Okay, then why do we have to consider climate change when we build new infrastructure? If we don't consider it, it's going to cost more later. In the long run, it's kind of saving money. At the
That's
beginning,
right.
it might cost a little bit, to
Yeah.
consider climate change.
So that's
But-
what it says is it down the road it might be more expensive, but at the beginning, where did they say it? The upfront cost here is significant. So it's going to cost a lot now, but
In the
down
long
the
run.
road, it's going to save us money.
Yeah, so the building should be climate resilient then? Can you
Yes,
say that?
good, yeah.
All right then. So let's see why the other options are wrong. The first one, we should diversify our investment into projects of the infrastructure. They didn't talk about diversifying our investment, right? It's not about investment, right?
No, it's about the actual construction and the infrastructure itself.
And number 2, we need to identify and maintain aging infrastructure in advance.
Well, that's true, and they do talk about that, but that's not the main idea
Yeah.
of the story.
All right. Number 3, we need to take serious action internationally against the climate change. They didn't talk about internationally. We have to take action,
Yeah, no, it's talking about taking action on climate change, but domestically. Yeah,
when we build new infrastructure, right?
yeah, they're talking about cities, right?
And number 4, it is unnecessary to expand infrastructure for the environment.
Oh, that's the opposite.
We need the infrastructure, right? But when we build a new infrastructure, we just think about the climate change.
That's
it,
right.
All right. So, all right, now the answer is number 5. Now let's move on to exercise 3.
Fantastic.
All right, here we go. Are you ready to read text?
I am ready.
Okay, here we go.
All musics have a history, and all music changes, has always been changing, though at various rates, and not always in the same direction. It would be foolish to assume that the music of India, because it is largely melodic and without harmony, somehow represents an earlier stage through which Western music has already passed, or that Europeans, in the days when they lived in tribes, had music similar to that of Native Americans. Musics do not uniformly change from simple to complex. Each music has its own unique history, related to the history of its culture, to the way people adapt to their natural and social environment. The patterns we may discern in the world's music history usually have to do with the relationships of cultures to one another. Thus, in the 20th century, as Western-derived culture has affected most others, most non-Western musics now show some influences of Western music. However, the results of this influence vary from culture to culture.
Wow, it's about music, right?
La 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 la!
So what about it, music?
Well, it says that each country has a different music history, and that not all countries have followed the same historical music trend.
So as time goes by, music changes, right? But depending on their culture, it can be different, right? Then
That's right.
so culture affects, how their music changes. Then, huh?
That's right.
So that's why the answer is number 5.
Ooh,
Number
we got five again.
Is, how music changes depends on each country's character. So we tend to overgeneralize, some countries' music, but we shouldn't do that, right?
That's right. It does say that other cultures influence another culture's music, but it doesn't follow the same pattern.
Yeah, for example, China and Korea, our music in these countries, we got influenced by Western culture and music, right? But do we have the same music?
No. And I would say right now, Korean music, K-pop, is influencing Western music because it's so popular now.
But each country, it influences differently, right?
That's right. If someone were to make K-pop in America right now, it would be different from K-pop in Korea, but still K-pop.
All right, then let's check. Let's take a look at each distractor. Okay. The first one says the diversity of harmony has important value in Western music. The diversity of harmony has important value in Western music.
Now, they do talk about harmony,
yeah.
but they talked about it with regards to India, I believe.
Yeah.
So if we look up here, India, because it is largely melodic and without harmony, so they talk about these words, but it's not in that context.
Just a distractor, right?
It's a distractor.
Okay, number 2. The influence of mass media has made similar music from across the world. They didn't talk about mass media, first of all.
No, and they said it's
And the music is different, not
it
similar.
is different, yeah. It talks about how it's influenced.
Yeah. But it talks about how music different in each country.
That's right.
And number 3, we need to preserve the music of minorities for the development of music.
Well, we should,
Yeah,
but that's not what it's about.
it doesn't talk about preserving, other people's, music,
No,
right?
no.
They did talk about India, minority kind of,
Well, they would be a minority within another culture,
That's
or here, Native Americans are a minority within a culture, but
That's right.
they didn't talk about minority groups specifically.
And also, they didn't talk about preserving the kind of musics, right?
That's right.
Okay, then. So that's why number 5 is the answer.
Fantastic.
Okay? Let's move on to exercise 4. You have to hit hard.
There we go.
All right, then. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay, here we go.
There's our vocabulary. We ready? Archaeology is a mode of production of the past. This would seem to be recognized by those many archaeologists and textbooks that talk at length of archaeological techniques. Archaeology seen as technology. The past has left remains, and they decay in the ground. According to their interest, an archaeologist works on the material remains to make something of them. So excavation is invention discovery or sculpture, where archaeologists craft remains of the past into forms which are meaningful. The archaeological record is, accordingly, not a record at all, but made, not given, data. The past is gone and lost, and a fortiori, through the equivocality of things, and the character of society as constituted through meaning, never existed as a definitive entity, the present anyway. An archaeologist has a raw material, the remains of the past, and turns it into something, data, a report, set of drawings, a museum exhibition, an archive, a television program, evidence in an academic controversy, and perhaps that which is termed knowledge of the past. This is a mode of production.
So it is about archaeology, right? What about it?
Well, it's saying that archaeology is creating the past, not necessarily explaining it.
I see. So they make the past kind of meaningful, right? Meaningful past.
They do, but they create it themselves. So they find something in the ground and they show it with their own interpretation through a report or an exhibition or a drawing. But it's their interpretation.
I see. So with the material remains, they kind of make something of them, hey?
That's right. Yeah.
I see. That's why the first sentence, it says archaeology is a mode of production of the past.
That's right.
And the last sentence, it repeats, right? This is a mode of production. So they do produce something out of remains, eh?
They make the past.
I see.
But it might not be a
So it can
true
be
past.
usually meaningful, huh? So number 3 is the answer. It says, through the research of the remains, archaeology makes the past meaningful. Is that right? The answer? So through the research of the remains, archaeology makes the past meaningful.
Wonderful.
All right, so let's take a look at each distractor. The first one says, it's a little long. The level of scientific development in society is reflected in the historical research of the archaeological remains. Wow, they didn't talk about scientific development or anything, right?
It's true, but that's not what they talked about.
They didn't talk about scientific development
That's
at
right.
all. And number 2, archaeology starts with the thorough historical research of the excavated remains.
It said it starts with? Okay, it didn't give us a timeline or a process or method.
Yeah. And also it's not the main idea either, right?
Yeah, remember, the distractors might be true, but they're not the correct answer.
Not
right?
the main idea. Okay, so number 4 is archaeology shows human nature by revealing lifestyle of the past. It doesn't talk about, showing human nature, right?
No, it doesn't. And again, this might be true, but it's not part of the story.
Okay. All right, number 5. Archaeologists should not immerse themselves in their own perspective when they research the remains of the past. Well,
This is also true. It means that they should not include their bias.
they produce, the past, right? But they didn't talk about, the archaeologists should not do this or things like that, right?
Very good.
Okay, so the answer is number 3. Okay, now time for exercise 5, right? From exercise 5, we have to figure out what the writer is suggesting to us.
That's right. So shall we read?
Okay, please.
An educational institution that I have been associated with recently went through a particularly traumatic time when the credibility of the administration was questioned by the faculty and staff. Various organizational consultants were interviewed to facilitate a healing process. Most of the consultants spoke of making the necessary structural changes to create a culture of trust. The institution finally hired a consultant whose attitude was that organizational structure has nothing to do with trust. Interpersonal relations based on mutual respect and an atmosphere of goodwill are what creates a culture of trust. Would you rather work as part of a school with an outstanding reputation or work as part of a group of outstanding individuals? Many times, these two characteristics go together. But if one had to make a choice, I believe that most people would opt to work with outstanding individuals.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so this text is about what?
This is about apparently a school, educational institution, a school that had a scandal maybe, and
They didn't trust each other, huh?
yeah, something happened. We're not told what.
Yeah.
But they brought in some consultants, some people to help them
Yeah.
try to build trust among each other again.
Yeah, at first, most of, consultants, they said they need structural changes, right? But finally, one consultant said what? How important interpersonal relations are to build, to create a culture of trust, right?
Right. So they said it's not the structure of the system they need to change, but the attitudes of the people in it.
So interpersonal relations are more important, huh? So can we check the answer? The answer is
Dun, dun,
number
dun.
5. So number 5
Wonderful.
is work on better interpersonal relations than structural improvement to create a culture of trust in the organization.
Oh, that was a long one, but that's correct, yes.
That's what the writer says. Eh? So at the end of the sentence, it says, where? It says, here, the sentence 5, interpersonal relations are based on mutual respect and the atmosphere of goodwill are what creates a culture of trust, right?
Perfect.
So it's what the writer wants to say, right?
That's right. Now the other distractors.
The first one, number 1 says, actively participate in educational programs to improve your interpersonal relations. They didn't say about participating in educational programs, right?
No, but it has interpersonal relations, so it's a good distractor. But not the correct answer.
Yeah, and also talking about education or something can be a good distractor, right?
That's right.
And number 2, prepare various forms of welfare policy to boost employee morale. Oh, they didn't talk about welfare policy at all.
Not at all. And it is about boosting employee morale, but mostly employee trust.
Yeah, not about welfare policy, right?
That's right.
Okay, number 3, verify the qualifications of an advisory committee when being consulted about how your organization operates.
Well, you should do that, but that's not what the story is
Yeah,
about.
they didn't talk about, verifying qualifications
Not at all.
of the committee, right?
That's right.
And number 4, prioritize the improvement of organizational structure to operate the educational institution efficiently. They didn't talk about prioritizing, huh?
Or about efficiency. So it was more about the relationships within the office and not the efficiency of the office.
That's right. This one was a little easy, right? Because it's an example and, each sentence is pretty easy.
That's good.
And find the answer easily too, huh?
Very good.
All right, then let's move on to exercise 6.
Fantastic. Ba-doop.
All right, then. Click. Are
Wonderful.
you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, here we go.
We all have been blessed with intellect. It is up to us to develop what we have been given. The true intellectual does not gloat in what she knows, for no one has the capacity to know everything, and only the fool pretends otherwise. Knowledge has no finish line. Instead, as with life, it is merely a perpetual marathon full of potential and pitfalls. Intellect is not to be celebrated. It should be constantly and humbly improved. The more one learns, the more one understands that he or she actually knows very little. Mastering one topic means very little in the sense that an infinite amount of new topics remain alive and waiting to be tackled. There is no better way to travel the journey of life than with a book held greedily in hand.
So it's about intellect, huh?
That's right. Your intelligence, or how clever and smart you are.
So what about it?
Well, it says, and this is a very well-known sort of idea, that the more you know, the more you need to learn. So as you get more and more intelligent, you do realize there's so much more to learn. So it makes you humble
I see.
about your own intelligence.
So you should keep pursuing knowledge, eh?
Yes, and so
There's no end, eh?
there's no end, and at the end it says always be reading, always learn.
Yeah, constantly and humbly, you gotta pursue knowledge, eh?
For your whole life. It's a life journey, it
I
says.
see. So the answer is number 5, eh?
Ooh,
So
we
it
love
says
number
we
5.
should constantly and humbly pursue knowledge. That's what the writer wants to say, right?
That's right.
Okay, so let's take a look at each distractor. Number 1, it says acquiring knowledge should be an autonomous process. Well, autonomous process. They didn't talk about it, right?
No, and it doesn't say that you should study alone. And it just means says you should study.
All right. Number 2 is we should use collective intelligence to break away from our self-righteousness.
Oof. Okay. It doesn't give that advice.
And also they didn't talk about collective intelligence, right?
Right.
And also they didn't talk about self-righteousness, right? What is the self-righteousness?
To believe that you're always correct.
I see. So they didn't talk about it at all, right?
That's right.
And number 3, we should develop various ways to acquire knowledge. They didn't talk about various ways, eh?
No, it's true, but it's not talking about various ways. It just says that you should.
And number 4, knowledge that you pursue should be value neutral. It says, we need to pursue knowledge, but it doesn't tell us what kind of knowledge we should pursue.
That's right. And so remember, even if these sentences are true, it's not the correct answer in context.
Yes. All right, then. It was a pretty easy too, huh? Okay, then. We will move on to the next one. Exercise 7. All right.
Very good. Here's our vocabulary.
Okay,
Are
are
we
you ready? Here we go.
Much of the written evidence historians of ancient times must use is the equivalent of what our legal system calls hearsay. It comes from writers who lived long after the events that they relate, and often contains much local folklore and tradition that may or may not be accurate. Furthermore, sometimes the level of hearsay between the witness and the original event is even greater. The writings of some ancient authors survive only in quotations from their work by other ancient figures. The history of Egypt, written by Menethau, an Egyptian priest of the early 3rd century BCE, is known only through such quotations. The same is true for the work of the Hellenistic Babylonian priest Berosus. Thus, not only were these authors writing long after the events they were describing, but we also have the added problem of trying to decide whether or not they were quoted correctly. Obviously, the historian has to analyze such sources with great care and seek independent validation of their testimony from archaeology or other texts.
My. It is a little difficult to understand. But to find what the writer is suggesting is pretty easy because the last sentence, it says historians has to. So it means the writer is emphasizing that sentence, right?
That's right.
So we can find the answer, first of all, quite easily. What is the answer? When studying ancient history, we should what? Analyze written evidence and seek to validate those sources.
That's right.
So, why do we need to seek evidence, analyze written evidence, and seek to validate the sources? That's because long time ago, in ancient times, they didn't have a writing system, right? So all the evidence the historians has to use is kind of, hearsay.
That's right. So it's
What is hearsay?
the history was passed down person to person through stories or speaking
So orally, huh?
orally, and that's what it's called, an oral history.
Oh, I see. So hearsay, it says, huh? Okay, so the examples in the middle is quite difficult, but the main idea is they are all, all the histories from the ancient times. It's all through quotations, eh?
From other witnesses or historians, and so it advises that we validate or double check.
Yeah, so because it's a hearsay, we need to check, eh?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
So the answer is number 2. Let's take a look at its destructor. The first one, when studying the human history of the ancient past, we have to rely on various sources of hearsay.
It more says you match the hearsay to other sources like archaeology, it says, or other texts. So not matching hearsay to hearsay. So that's not correct.
Okay, number 3, when writing history books, we should use terms that readers are familiar with. They didn't talk about the terms at all, huh?
No, it's a good idea.
Because we have to understand.
Sure, but that's not what the story was about.
They didn't talk about terms at all. And number 4 is when we evaluate historical facts, we should try to rule out historical records that are contradictory to one another.
Well, that might be true, but it's not about historical records that oppose each other. It's talking about the ancient historical record that needs to be double checked.
Yes, that's right. And number 5, we need to exclude the subjective perspectives of researchers to gain reliability in historical study.
Well, again, that might be true. We want to eliminate bias or prejudice or stereotypes from the researchers, but that's not what the story's about.
It's not about excluding those perspectives,
right.
We just have to double check, as you said. All right, then let's move on to the last one, exercise 8.
Wonderful. Okay, here's our vocabulary. Are we ready?
I'm ready.
I'm ready too.
Okay, here we go then.
Ordinary citizens are often keen to blame minority or culturally oppressed groups for their problems or failures. Often this can be explained by ignorance or fear. If we do not know or understand the culture of a minority or oppressed group, it is easy to see its behavior as unacceptable or uncivilized, and therefore not worthy of consideration or respect. Only when we come to understand another culture's ways can we start to realize that it is, like ours, only human, and neither totally wrong nor totally right. It should be a part of a journalist's role to give readers the information they need to reach sensible decisions, not to play on their fears and prejudices. If journalists tell people only what they expect to hear about minority or oppressed groups, then the debate about their position in society is not advanced. It is part of the journalist's duty to help advance society's awareness of such problems by providing people with a wider truth than their existing prejudices.
So what is the text about?
Well, we learn that it's about journalism. Halfway through, we learn this. And it's about journalism's role to help society get away from its prejudice.
I see. Because we tend to blame the minority or culturally oppressed groups, for their problems, right?
That's right.
If something bad happens, we blame them, right?
That's right. And the journalists should not focus on those problems. They should tell a broader or wider explanation.
Yeah, it's a journalist duty, huh? So the answer is number 5. Journalists should try hard to raise awareness about minorities and culturally oppressed groups, So when something happens, they don't blame those minorities or, oppressed groups, right?
That's
culturally
right.
oppressed groups. We need to understand them, right?
That's right.
So that's the journalist duty. Okay, so let's take a look at its distractor. The first one says, journalists should listen to opinions of their audience or readers and use them in their articles. It doesn't talk about they need to listen to readers' opinions, eh?
Yes, and I don't think they should do that anyways. That's not their job. So that is not the answer at all.
Yeah, they have to report based on the fact, eh?
That's right.
Okay, number 2, media should report any event quickly and accurately. They didn't talk about,
They didn't talk about that. I mean, that would be good. Quickly and accurately on events, that would be great. But that's not what the point is.
And the number 3, as time changes, we should acknowledge and accept the characteristics of a multicultural society. They didn't talk about multicultural society, huh?
No. They talked about minorities and oppressed groups within a society, so that makes it multicultural, but they didn't focus on it.
Yeah, it's not about acknowledging or accepting. It's about the journalist duty, right?
That's right.
Okay, number 4, readers should make it a habit to critically examine the information provided by the press. It didn't focus on the readers, huh?
No, that's a true sentence. That's a good thing, but that's not the point of the story. It did not focus on the reader's duty. It focused on the journalist's duty.
Okay, then. Wow, we found all the answers today.
Oh, good for us.
Okay, I think that's all for today then. All right, then. We will see you in chapter what?
Chapter 5.
Okay, see you soon.
Take care.
Take care.